great pleasure of interviewing Dr. Michaela Musilova. She and I met at the Analog Astronaut Conference last year in Arizona, and we were discussing some of her amazing projects that she gets to do around the globe. Dr. Michaela is an astrobiologist, explorer, keynote speaker, and author. She's been conducting space related research at institutions around the world, including NASA, ESA, Caltech, University College London, Chiba University in Japan, and the Canada France Hawaii Telescope, just to name a few. She's been the commander of over 30 simulated missions to the moon and Mars, with the most missions led on record in collaboration with NASA and many internationally recognized organizations. Currently, she is the president and founder of the nonprofit Extreme Frontiers, which is something that I really connected with when she was giving her presentation last year at the AAC. Her project, Astro 7 Summits, is something we're going to be diving into today, as well as the pursuit of happiness. Michaela, it's a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on. I know you've been traveling a lot this year. What has been on your agenda? And can you tell us more about the Astro 7 Summits project that you're leading?
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, that's actually very much what I've been up to most of this year. Starting with essentially December 31st of last year, I flew out to Antarctica and was doing research there as part of the Astro 7 Summits project. And the project is focused on a combination of research, educational, and outreach activities at the tallest mountain on each continent. So those are the 7 summits, basically the tallest
Amazing.
mountain on each continent. And I tried to do research, for example, in terms of astrobiology to understand what are the limits of life on Earth. So, to what extreme temperatures, pressures, and other conditions can life survive in on Earth? And that will then help us potentially find alien life on Mars. So, this is a collaboration I have with NASA and a lot of other institutions around the world. But I also study climate change, how even these extreme environments are being affected by what's happening around the world, if
Mm.
there's human pollution, things like that, and most importantly, what can we do to minimize our human effects on the environment. And in terms of education, I try to bring several projects that are designed by students from around the world on these expeditions so they get to have a direct input into the research world and test their instruments or experiments, things like that, and to encourage them to be more involved in STEM projects, but also hopefully to give them a head start if they want to become scientists as well. And in terms of outreach, I post about what I do on social media to try and make my work as a scientist more accessible to the public. But I also do a lot of educational presentations. So I recently came back from Slovakia, where I'm from Slovakia originally, and I had a big presentation tour there from tiny little children to people literally of all ages. So that's a very important part of my work. And I also film documentaries during each of these expeditions, again, to try and make my work a bit more accessible to the public.
Amazing. Now, definitely the extreme environments, extreme weather, we've been noticing that more. I mean, it's no longer something that we can ignore or say is not happening. I mean, just the other day in Austin, the winds were so heavy and it blew through this dust storm. There was a fire also in Fredericksburg.
Oh, wow.
And I literally felt like I was in the Nevada desert at Burning Man. It was like a red sun, very dystopian, and now we're having these, extreme heat waves and blizzard cycles, and it's really interesting. And so, how has your work studying the extremes shifted in recent years? Are you noticing anything in particular? I know you do a lot of work in Antarctica as well. Is there something that really stands out to you that you're seeing as a trend or a pattern?
I mean, I've been studying mostly cold environments throughout my research years. So, for example, even during my PhD, I spent a lot of time in Greenland, camping next to a glacier. And I think when I first started out, we would know that things are changing around the world based on our data. So, we saw the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and we started to see impacts on glaciers, for example. But at the time, it maybe wasn't so obvious as you just described. But actually, it was during my time in Greenland, that was 2012. We were just doing our research on the glacier, and then suddenly this heat wave hit, and the glacier just melted in an incredible fashion, the fastest ever on record. And basically, overnight, it created almost like a tsunami of water that like destroyed bridges further down the rivers, and it was just completely unexpected. And that was the first kind of big wake up call we had as scientists, and we're hoping the public as well, that it's no longer something that we're just measuring and trying to tell people about. It's
Right.
literally happening right now, and it's having effects on communities. But unfortunately, that didn't reach as many people as we hoped. And nowadays, I think people are starting to see it themselves, whether through extreme weather or simple things like comparisons. When I went to Kilimanjaro, the tallest mountain in Africa, there were almost no glaciers near the summit. But when my father went there in 1995, so a couple of decades ago, there was still a lot of ice and snow near the summit. And so it's simple things like that that are becoming really visible to people.
Mm.
And that's part of my presentations when I talk to children or the public of all ages. It's simple things like that that are starting to reach people, where they can really just see, a comparison of two pictures from two different times within one person's lifetime. And it is really changing rapidly, and it will have big effects on all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you were saying that, I was thinking about David Attenborough's Planet Earth series that came out, and he shows that timeline and then the difference in landscape. And it's really jarring to see that because it's almost like you look in the mirror every day. You don't notice the small shifts and changes, but someone you haven't seen for 6 months or a year, and they're like, "Wow, your hair's so long," right? Or you look so different. Because it's that contrast. But when we're seeing it every day, we don't necessarily notice those things, or it's not until it's put out in front of us. And so it must be a bit of a shock, even though you know the data. Is it still shocking when you look at it side by side comparison like that?
I think at this point I've been a little bit numb to the whole thing because I've been studying this for a couple of decades, so it's not something unusual, but it's
Yeah.
definitely surprising to me when it happens in places that I don't expect. So, for example, Antarctica, we've been following some changes happening there, but when it's like big changes that happen almost out of nowhere, that's when even us scientists who are well aware of these details, even we're surprised. So when a giant chunk of an iceberg suddenly, breaks off from somewhere and we didn't expect that to happen for some time, or we didn't expect it to be a certain size, or things like that, where we keep hoping for the best, and then unfortunately sometimes something happens and we're like, oh, it's worse than we thought, or it's happening faster, or things like that. So that's usually when I take a moment, like, okay, deep breath. Let's think
Yeah.
about this for a moment, and most importantly, what I try and tell people, we don't want to be scaring people. Oh, doom and gloom. It's more. It's just so important to be aware of it, and even more importantly, aware of what each of us can do, because we can still minimize these effects. They're happening, yes, but doesn't mean that the world is ending. It just means we have to try a bit harder to make sure these effects are going to be the smallest possible for us and future generations. And it's simple things from recycling, consuming less. That's one of the biggest issues, is that
Yeah.
many people still buy more food than they need, and there's a lot of food waste, or they keep on buying new items of clothing or phones or whatever it is, and they don't use what they have to the maximum. So now we're just piling more and more waste around the world, which that's causing issues. And so it's these little things that each of us can do to minimize our imprint on the planet, and that will go a long way if all of us really put an effort in this direction.
Yeah, no, that's a great point because we need to avoid that being numb or becoming apathetic, because that apathy is where things go to die. Right? Whether that's a relationship or a job or a company or a country, right? When the people involved no longer care and they feel like what they do has no impact, then you know, nothing is happening. And I remember reading this quote from the Daily Stoic, and it was like, if you want a clean city, it begins with sweeping your own doorstep.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
if everybody swept their own doorstep, we would have a clean city. And so, what are some of the messages that you share? Because I really feel like the lift is heavier for most people who are older because they're used to a certain lifestyle, or they're, especially in the West, very, very comfortable. Like we have an excess in a lot of ways. So really planting those seeds at younger ages. What do you see some of the younger generation? Are you hopeful from some of the behavior that you already are starting to see when you go into school environments and you're talking to students? I personally feel that they care a lot more, and rightly so, right? Because they're inheriting. We are all inheriting this planet and must be stewards of it, and yet for so long, for some reason, we just thought we could do whatever we wanted. I mean, even we have a junk problem in space as well, right? We
Yes.
we have polluted the Earth space system, not just Earth itself. So, what are you seeing there that is something that's hopeful and positive?
hmm I mean, I'm definitely seeing young people are much more aware about these things. I remember when I was their age, I was a teenager, and I first found out about climate change, because at the time it wasn't something that was talked about a lot. And I think it was a documentary. I don't know if it was by Al Gore. I think it's called The Inconvenient Truth or something like that.
Hmm.
And that's the first time I saw the graphs with CO2, greenhouse gases, the effect they have already had, and the effect they will likely have, and all these other things. It was the first time I was made aware of this, because we didn't really talk about it much at school. And it really hit me, and I suddenly became this like little ranger, and I was going around telling family and friends we have to recycle, and unplug your devices when you're not using them to save energy, and like I was just doing all the things, and they thought I was a little bit crazy, but I was like really passionate about it. And that remains with me to this day. And now my dad has started to do that, decades later. He's like,
I love
oh yeah, we have to unplug all these devices, and we have
it.
to do this and recycle that. And I'm like, well, I guess better late than never. It's one of those things. But I do see that with the young people, that they, I give presentations, and sometimes I'm a bit worried that maybe they didn't get the message, or maybe I
Mm,
was being too technical or something. And then they really surprise me, because when I give presentations, especially to school children, I on purpose schedule a very long time for Q&As, because they always have a lot of questions, and I really want to make sure I can answer as many of them as possible. And one of the recurring questions I get every time is that they're really observant when I talk about some important matters. For example, I talk a lot about how empathy is extremely important. I talk about it in particular in relation to space missions, because as you kindly mentioned at the beginning, I was the commander of over 30 simulated missions to the moon and Mars, and so I talk about some of the lessons learned from those experiences, and one of
yeah.
them is just how very important empathy it is, and how it helped us become better crews. And instead of just being a group of professionals, quote unquote, locked up in a space station trying to survive on Mars, simulated Mars, we became a space family, and that's how we were able to have successful missions. And empathy was vital for that. And and I mentioned that as just something that I learned, and I give some examples, and I move on, and then I give similar types of examples with regards to taking better care of our planet. And again, I give an example from the space experiences, because I know that resonate, or that interests young people a lot. So for example, during the simulated missions, I on purpose encouraged the crew members to use the least amount of water as possible. It was one of the
Mm,
requirements to successfully accomplish a mission. And so we would only take a bucket shower, so not a proper shower, but just use a few liters of water as a quote unquote shower from a bucket once every
right.
2 weeks. So very small amount of water. For a lot of people, that was like a real shock to like minimize their hygiene so much. But it really made them appreciate how much water we have on Earth, and how we can't just open the tap and just let water run like crazy. Instead, on these missions, we would literally be careful about every single drop, because it accumulates, and it would have wasted all our water supply for that mission.
Yeah.
So it was these little things that I mentioned, and I didn't realize just what an impact it would have on the young people. And so during the Q&A, they almost always asked about the empathy kind of learnings, and in a special experiment that we did focused on empathy during the missions. And then they always think about this water issue, and how we don't appreciate it as much as we should on Earth, and same as other resources and things that we have. So I think it does, resonate with them. They do understand it. You just have to
Yeah.
present it in an approachable way, and that's why I give these kind of more spacey examples because it's more cool.
Yeah.
But also maybe things like, limiting the hygiene to a shower every 2 weeks does, hit home with some of them, especially the teachers. You can always see on their faces that they're shocked that you would only take the shower
Yeah.
once every 2 weeks. So it's little things like that, and I see that it does affect the young people, and I could see that they, think about it for a while, and I really hope that then they take that home and maybe, tell their parents about it. Oh, maybe we should be more careful about water and this and that and the other, be more
Yeah.
empathetic.
Absolutely. I mean, what a great point. And it's interesting because if you talk to people who are outdoorsy or they go camping or trekking or anyone that goes to Burning Man, it's like, oh yeah, the baby towel wipe down, right? Or being very strategic with when you're using the water to wash, how you maintain gray water and dispose of it, and just all of these different types of things. It's totally doable, and yet we don't do that because we don't need to in a lot of cases. But I've just remembered that when I was 14, I did a program called Civil Air Patrol from, I think I might from 13 to 17. I was probably in this program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
I
it.
think I've heard of it, but yeah, we don't have something like that in Slovakia, so I'm
Okay, yes. So
not
it's
sure too well.
It's a high school program. You get together once a week, but you learn search and rescue, you learn how to fly an airplane. It's
Okay.
essentially the high school version of what's known as ROTC in college to go into the military, right? And so a lot of people, you wear a uniform, you do all of that stuff. But I remember doing desert survival training and then also going to a boot camp. And then that was what allowed me to get my second lieutenant ranking within the Civil Air Patrol. And we had 60-second showers. So before you get in the shower, you'd be putting soap on your body and shampooing your hair and brushing your teeth and like basically just going in to shower off.
Mm-hmm.
And then we failed an inspection of the room, or something, right? So we had a penalty, a punishment, and
Mm-hmm.
we got cut to 30-second showers.
Ah.
And I remember towards like the end of this 9 days that we were there, we still had the minute showers. We gained it back. And after about 20 seconds, I was like, okay, well, I'm done. So I'll get out. Like, what am I standing here for? And it was very much a utility of a function rather than like, oh, it's nice and warm. I'm gonna stand here and,
Mm-hmm.
have my shower thoughts and things. And probably for about 2 weeks when I got home, my showers were less than 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom and my stepdad were like, "Are you even clean?" I'm like, "I'm probably cleaner than you." But, it just shows that we can do those
Mm-hmm.
things. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
and I'm a firm believer in learning how to do those things now when it's not necessary, so that if it ever did become necessary, you have the skill set. It's not so jarring. And, the empathy and the high EQ that's required in more intense environments can exist because you're not all systems haywire through the
Yep.
change.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like to go back to that point. So empathy, I mean, this is such a crucial skill set that, you know, traditionally has been the soft skill. It's not a soft skill whatsoever. I actually think it's the magic of human connection, and it's what really enables leaders to lead, to inspire others, to connect, to spark something in them that has them motivated to go and do something without you forcing them with a stick or a carrot, right? So
Yep.
you mentioned empathy as being one of the biggest takeaways from simulating these intense environments and being on extreme expeditions. What did you notice when empathy was missing?
So, interestingly enough, when before I became the director of the facility High Seas in Hawaii, where I ran these missions um, during my PhD, and before that, I was part of different expeditions. I mentioned Greenland, and I also went to various other extreme places around the world and did some research
Mm,
in Japan. And most of the time, I was in groups mostly with men. Many times, the only woman or one of the few.
yeah.
And during those times, for years and years, I was told that empathy is a weakness, it's a bad thing,
Mm,
and that if I continue to be so sensitive and compassionate towards others, that, I'll fail and whatever, I'll never be able to achieve the things that I want to, and so on. And I could never really get my head around it because to me, it just seems like such a natural, important thing. But there was definitely a time in my life where I was trying to suppress it to some degree and tougher, because that was basically what these people would just say over and over again to me, that I need to, grow thicker skin and take all these like mean comments with, as a joke, and all these things which fortunately nowadays are not acceptable in
Right.
most societies, but back then it was essentially enforced upon me,
Yeah.
and I had very little say in the matter, just to try and just survive. So it was interesting that when eventually I got into the role of being a commander of a crew, at first I really didn't know how to do it the best way. And the first time I was commander was in 2017. I wasn't originally meant to be the commander of the crew, and then it just happened for various reasons. And this was even before I went to Hawaii. It was at a different facility. And I really struggled with this leadership position because intuitively I wanted to be empathetic. I've always kind of been a mediator. Maybe because I'm very empathetic, I'm
Mm,
always to some degree able to understand each side of the story. So when there were arguments, I kind of was always in the middle, trying to like calm down each side and
yeah.
make them communicate better between each other, because I didn't want things to escalate. But as a commander, I suddenly, had all this stuff that had been like enforced upon me for so many years, that, oh no, I should have like a distance from the crew, and I should be like
Right.
this and I should be like that. And it did really give me some trouble that time, until I kind of just decided to let it go and just follow my intuition. And that is ultimately what helped me get through that mission. And I learned so much about myself. So later, when I was essentially professionally the commander of some of these crews, because I was essentially told to be the commander, or for whatever reason was selected to be one. I started to play around with this, going like, maybe this empathy thing isn't so bad, and maybe unfortunately I was just, you know, made to believe that it was a bad thing. But if anything, I always felt like it was one of my stronger skills, and so I started to really apply it more and just be more myself. And suddenly everything was just going really smoothly. And sure, of course, occasionally something went wrong, or there was some kind of conflict, but I always just stayed true to myself and did, what my gut told me to do, or tried to do that. And in some shape or form, we were always able to solve the problems, and we always became a space family rather than just this group of professionals that needs to survive together. And so, eventually I just finally grabbed onto this, and it's like, this is my strength. This is,
Yeah.
what I won't say being best at, but definitely one of things that I'm better at. and and then just try to teach that to the others as well, so that I'm not the only person in the crew that's trying to do this. And I try to encourage everyone in the crew to be like that, and it really helped a lot. So it was kind of a journey of self-discovery that led me to these findings in a way.
Awesome. I love to hear that. And thank you so much for sharing. Um, what I also heard you say was that word should, right? And so many of us live by that word, thinking that we should do this, we should do that, we should be this way. And I had a coach that I did a boundaries work with, and she said, "Don't should all over yourself." And it always stuck with me because it's tongue in cheek. It's really fun to say and silly, but it's true, right? Because we often end up doing things that are completely unnecessary, that take extra energy, and that are counterintuitive. It feels like the right thing for whatever reason because we have this idea of what it should be. But it actually does the opposite of what we want. And so it's really refreshing to hear everyone's journeys and how they self discover because really I think a lot of it is a discovery process, and it's also um, the context, right? Like, where are you? Are you in the simulation? Are you at home? Different levels of that sharing and vulnerability and things that you might say or not say, it's like, where's the nuance? Are you discerning enough? And can you be present enough and aware of your own reactions and beingness and relatedness to others. And so it really is just a skill set that we need to practice. And so it doesn't matter, how old you are that you discover this. It's something that can be learned and honed and practiced. And even the most practiced of us still can, stuff it up sometimes and feel like
Exactly.
Wait, what? I thought I was doing it right.
And that's why it's important to just keep on learning and observing. You know, that's the thing is like you think you learned something and now you're gonna apply it to everything you do, but so many situations are different. Everyone
Yeah.
is different in some shape or form. You can't always apply the same method or approach or whatever to every situation out there. So it's really
Mm.
important to have an open mind. And for example, one thing that I learned during this process is because of those other things that were, you know, I was how to put that was preached to me to some degree that this is how things should be, blah blah.
Hmm.
Um, I was really worried about opening up because that's my actually my natural state is to be a very frank, open person. And that a lot of people tell me that, oh, I can't believe you just shared this with me or told me this. I'm like, well, I don't know, it just comes naturally. Why would I hide
Yeah.
that? You know, if I
Yeah.
find that strange. But then for a while, I was worried about opening up to that degree with my crew members because I was worried they would find that again as a weakness or they'll use
Mm.
it against me, which is something that had happened before when I was still very new to this and surrounded mostly by male colleagues. And it did seem like many times whenever I was vulnerable, they almost always use it against me to some degree. So it made me
Yeah.
be afraid of opening up and being myself. But with time and just learning how to open up in a safe way or in a safe space,
Hmm.
taught me that actually people really like that approach, that they could feel that
Hmm.
they could be themselves if I'm totally open with them, even in a leadership position. And they didn't find it as a vulnerability. On the contrary, they thought it was very like a strong thing of me to do, to open up
Yeah.
and own my weaknesses, own my mistakes, and then they could trust me more as their leader. And so it's these interesting things that almost seem counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
thanks to just giving it a try and just, you know, potentially learning from failure, but luckily it wasn't that way, I discovered so many things which then helped me so much in later steps in my life.
I love that. Yes, it's powerful. And you know, it's it's this funny thing that happens because we're humans, right? We connect through story. When we can relate to someone, we feel more connected. And so when we can witness someone being strong while they're vulnerable, not completely breaking down, but and you know, and owning the mistake, it takes the power away completely. You know, I've had people in the past say things to me and go like, "Oh, well, didn't that happen?" Be like, "Yeah, it absolutely did. I made the wrong choice." And then they're like, "Oh," because they're expecting you to be defensive or to try to justify or, you know, and so when you own it completely, then it just takes the wind out of other people's
Mm-hmm.
sails. Because you know what, there's always going to be the person in the room that's going to want to poke the bear or, you know, kind of just try to destabilize you. And when you can stand there and in your truth and be strong and say, like, yes, that's something that occurred, or no, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It just, they're all of a sudden like, whoa, okay. And then, you know, we see them in such a different way. And that's actually what allows them to have their own transformation. Um, and it's so permission giving. Like it's like a breath of fresh air when you're with somebody else who isn't trying to pretend all the time. And some people, like, we don't even know that we're doing it
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, right? It's through our own discovery process that we go, oh, hey, that wasn't actually me. That was this personality I developed because I needed to be safe,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I mean, that's really the whole psychology of humans is we develop personalities because of things that happened to us when we're
Mm-hmm.
younger, and then that's running the show. And so as we start to understand those pieces, we can get really into those complexities and into those tiny little nuances, but that's where the power and the safety come in, because in extreme environments you need the trust of your crewmates. It needs to be a tight knit family unit. It cannot be this, like, I will only talk to you if, because you're in an environment where that split second decision or the time to think about all of those things because you don't like someone or you're mad at them because they made you wrong could literally be a life and death situation.
Yep, yep, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something in aviation in my background, crew resource management, which I'm sure you're familiar with this term as well. And it becomes more safe. And high operating teams operate with high levels of communication, high performing teams. And I remember reading, I think it was the book, The Culture Code.
Mm-hmm.
And have you read this book?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so it's a lot about organizational culture and really to the ethos of what you've been speaking about within the unit of the crew on these missions. And talking a lot about the shoulds and how people think we need to position ourselves to be strong or be perceived a certain way. And the author goes on to share some stories. And one of the stories that really stood out to me was an example he used. Now, I don't remember the flight number and all of that, but it's in the culture code if you want to go listen to the book, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll have that in the show notes. But there was a situation on board an aircraft where it was pretty dire, and there was a training captain on board. And this training captain, when he walked into the cockpit, he took a deep breath, and the first thing he said was, "Anybody got any ideas?" And by him saying that and not pretending like he knew what to do and start commanding people around, it opened the door where everyone else could contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, they landed. And if I'm not mistaken, there were no fatalities. I believe it was a crash landing, but no fatalities. And they managed to avert what could have been a full blown fatal crash. And if he had come in, they talked about that later. By him doing that, it enabled them to brainstorm and
Mm-hmm.
have a conversation about what could be the best course of action, which led to them making really good decisions. And so they like kind of broke that down of
Mm-hmm.
if he had just come in with no idea but trying to show that he had a good idea, it would have resulted in a loss of life and a tragedy. And yet he was able to be vulnerable, be honest, and then that created the safety for communication to occur. And whether or not we're in a cockpit of an aircraft or a rocket, or we're in an intense environment in Antarctica, or you're in the boardroom, that kind of communication can really change the whole experience and the whole perception that people have and their experience of working with you.
Yeah, exactly. That that's a really good example, and I definitely experienced a lot of similar things where I think, for example, in my home country, Slovakia, people are used to presenting themselves this way, where they know everything and they couldn't possibly admit to not knowing something, and then whereas I've always tried to be honest, I guess it just comes naturally to me. If anything, I have to be careful not to say too much. That's kind of my issue. um, so for a long time, people would say, "But won't people think that you're not competent enough if you
Mm.
don't always have the answer or whatever, or if you show your vulnerabilities?" But exactly like you said, it shows that you own what you know and what you don't know, and very importantly, you give space to others to be able to give inputs and for them to feel safe to do that, which can be life changing in some situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you as you were saying that too, my mom's side of the family is Polish. It's
Mm-hmm.
the eastern, the Slovakian region. I remember there was a lot of like showiness growing up and having to present a certain way. And some of that is cultural, right? And then realizing, hey, that's not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But every generation has a different experience, and then every culture has a different experience. And then when you travel around the world, if you're an expat or if you're a third culture kid, or you come in with that scientific mind to an artsy community, right? There's always going to be these differences that we get to play in. And if we can look at it in that vein, then it's an opportunity for us to be curious. And I'm going to gather that you were probably a very curious child. Is that
I
right?
definitely was. It's thanks to that I became who I became today.
Yeah.
At first, it was just being very curious about the environment. Thanks to my parents, they took my brother and I hiking and camping all the time. We were of modest means, put it that way. So when we went somewhere, it was always a bit of an adventure because we're
Yeah.
camping, not always the best conditions, or sleeping in the car and things like that. But it's these adventures that taught us so many kind of life skills with my brother. And thanks to my parents always trying to take us somewhere, even though they couldn't take us always to the Disneylands and things like that, but just taking us
Hmm.
into the nature at least helped us discover new places, create a connection with nature, and that's where my curiosity really started. I was really curious how everything worked. I think my
Yeah.
first biggest love were volcanoes. I wanted to know why
Fun.
they explode, where it happens, how many people they kill, everything I had to know. And that's where my scientist mind, I think, really started to do its thing. And then a
Yeah.
year later, in a similar way, I discovered space, where I was actually bored while my parents were shopping, and I was just browsing for a book. And there was a whole chapter about the moons of Jupiter and Saturn and whether they could have some life
Hmm.
there. And somehow it sparked something in my brain that
Yeah.
I work with to this day, trying to find alien life. And that's basically how my journey of an astrobiologist started.
I love that. Oh, that's so fun. I love hearing people's like origin stories when that sparked for them. My mom used to take me to the planetarium. She would take seminars at night after work. And a lot of times I remember like I'd be in the back row with my sleeping bag and I'd kind of peek out and look. And my favorite thing was they'd do the night show. So you're kind of like laying back in the thing. And I'd always get really sleepy and probably fall asleep in the car. But we would go out and watch meteor showers, and it would be so cool. But I think, it would just be exciting. And then I saw the Magic School Bus. I don't know if you ever came across this. It was a
I
cartoon.
vaguely remember that.
Yeah, and there was an
Right.
episode about them going to space, and I was like, I want to go do that. That would be the best field trip ever. And when I was about 6 years old, we went to Six Flags Great America, and they had one of those. Like 3D, you kind of go through the safety briefing and you go in the rocket and you sit
Mm-hmm.
down, right? And then you take off and you go on this little mission. And I legitimately thought I went to the moon. Like I thought we went and that was like a field trip. And my mom was trying to explain that to me when we got back. She's like, "Well, I mean, look at the rocket's still here. There's no blast on the ground." And, it was a video and we didn't actually go. And I was like, but I saw it.
Aw.
And we're not too far away from that being a reality where that might be a field trip that schools get to take kids on and experience, right? It's not without the with it's not going to be maybe that inexpensive in the next 5 years, but it's still very close in our current technology and what we're doing, much closer than it was 30 years ago. And it's quite exciting. And it's also exciting to me to see more of the average person being curious about space.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, it was very few and far between. You had to kind of go find your space nerd friends.
Right.
And now a lot of people are following what's going on. It's obviously got a lot more public attention. It's quite an exciting time, and I love seeing people who have checked out a little bit. It happens to all adults, no matter what industry we're in. We get a little apathetic, we get tired, like life, there's so many things that go on. But to reactivate that spark and go back into the joy of that curiosity and that, like, why does it do this? And then today I saw, I'm not sure if you read, maybe it was yesterday, that um, because of the James Webb Telescope, they're now thinking that maybe we exist inside of a black hole, and then that
I
would
saw that somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, it would totally upend a lot of theories that we have. And like that's exciting, right? It's just exciting to have these different considerations of life and what that means and how things exist. And I'm sure you've seen some incredible things as an astrobiologist studying life at the edges of the extreme.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The space sector, it really gives you so much perspective, because
Mm,
it's easy sometimes to get kind of bogged down in your everyday life and all your, sometimes it feels like almost petty problems. And of course, they're not always petty, but it just, sometimes people really focus on some small things. And if you just try and back away a little bit, a few steps, and kind of
yeah,
see a bigger picture, you can realize that, oh, maybe it's really not that important. And actually, there are more important things in life, or better things to focus on.
yeah,
And that's one of the good things about the space sector. It really helps you like zoom out a lot,
yes.
a lot more than most people do. And that's what's actually been guiding me a lot in my life. Is I always try and see, you know, what effect can my actions have.
Mm,
I personally always hope to do something that's beneficial for others, and I don't need a legacy or my name to be written on a wall somewhere or whatever, but it's more,
yeah.
I just want to live knowing that I was able to help someone else's life for the better, or improve it in some shape or form, or inspire them, give them that little seed of something that makes them excited, or maybe, inspire them to also pursue a space career or things like that. So whenever I kind of myself get bogged down on something that might be upsetting me or whatever, I then just remind myself of all the good things that happened, the good things that I did towards others, and how I'm still on this journey towards wanting to do something good in this world. And, sometimes there's setbacks, sometimes things don't work out, but overall, I can kind of tell myself, no, you've done a good job so far, and you're still on the right path. Just keep going. So that's my
Yeah,
little way of kind of getting around that, and the space perspective does help with that for sure.
I love that. Yeah, the perspective is so important because, like you said, sometimes we're just so close to the problem or so kind of in the weeds with things, and then when we zoom out, we realize, hey, that's really small in the grand scheme of things, and it can help us to really anchor into the present moment more. That's something I've definitely been working on the last like 5 years. I'm by no means an expert yet. Don't know if I'll ever be because I'm still human, but the more you lean into that present moment, the more you can be in tune with what's actually occurring for you, which helps with empathy and, making those choices that will serve you rather than the ones that, because you should or because there's a path or a timeline. And so I'm not a huge fan of these, like 30 under 30 or 40 under 40 things. I'm like, what about 60 under 60? Or 80 under 80, right? There's these amazing stories of these people who go back to school when they're in their 60s to get a new degree or, finally complete something that they didn't get a chance to for whatever reason. Maybe they had to go to war, or they, lived in poverty and, that type of thing. And now they have this opportunity and they go back and they accomplish something that's, incredible. That I think should be celebrated. There's no timeline. We don't have to do all of these things by a certain time. And I find that a lot of times we get there and we don't really enjoy it anyway because we're now projecting to the next thing and then the next thing and then it just never ends, right? And so
That
we're
was
not
definitely
actually
the story of
enjoying.
my life for a while.
Mine too.
Um,
Mine too, for sure.
I mean, to give myself credit, a lot of it was motivated by finance. So,
Of course.
just to explain a little bit, I self funded my whole studies, and it,
Wow.
it was a challenge. Like, I started fundraising for this by having multiple jobs, even in middle school and high school, and try to get the best possible grades to get scholarships. And even then, that wasn't enough. I got into university in London, University College London, and London's a very expensive city. So even while I was there, I had three jobs, and I applied to every single scholarship that I could find, and grants, and even charities helped me. And it was just a really hard time for so many years in a row to be constantly searching for funding. And in a way,
Right.
it paid off because the more scholarships I had, it was easier to get other ones. I got, for example, a scholarship to study at Caltech in the US with a scholarship worth so much money I couldn't even imagine at the time. And so it had its good sides, but then suddenly, I finished my PhD at I was 25 or so, and uh, and I almost didn't even know what to do next because I had just been living in this accelerated life where I was sleeping for 4 hours a day, working like
Wow.
crazy to finance everything to survive.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I wasn't even too sure what the next step should be, and there were a lot of societal expectations for me, and I was able to achieve a lot of things by the time I was 30. And then finally, when I hit my early 30s, I started to kind of think about the situation a little bit more, going, this is, all great, and I achieved a lot of good things, and it put me in a good position now, but I need to live my life more. I can't
Yeah.
just be surviving it or just keep pushing myself to achieve things one after another. So it took a moment, and that's when I finally started to slow down a bit. And I'm still working on that. It's definitely a work in progress to finally slow down and, um, see things from a different perspective and realize there's no rush, just
Yeah.
live your life. Yes, you should have some goals, and some things will require more work, but you don't have to go at such a pace as before financial constraints experience, but also societal kind of pushed me in that way.
Yeah, that pressure to constantly be doing, right? Or you're not valuable if you're not producing, if you're not achieving something when,
Exactly.
it's not even necessary. And I think that's a journey people usually discover for themselves, and where, what lifestyle they want to live, and really tying it back to values. But I was very much the same. I still have to remember to slow down, because I think you and I are similar in that we operate at a faster speed than many others. And that feels good a lot of the time, but it's still very important to remember to build in that time for the rest, for the integration, the recovery, and to not always just needing to go chase the next thing. Because it does become very hollow. That was a big part of my journey too. It was getting to like all my goals that I arbitrarily set, from a career, financial, whatever perspective. And then I was like 29 and I had all these things, and everyone else is telling me my life is awesome. And I was like, I have to keep doing this forever? Like, this is awful. I don't want to do this. And then that realization of, yeah, it sounds great, but why do I feel so empty and lonely, and like, who am I even? And it was a really interesting experience. And it's one of those things of, if you don't ever sit down and really get honest with yourself about why you're choosing, like, are you pursuing that because you think it will make you happy, or because you know it will make you happy? Who was it that kind of planted that seed for you to go chase the thing? Um, because when we can start to tune into that and regularly tune in, not just like, hey, I set this goal when I was 18, now I'm 35, and oh yeah, let me check back on that goal. Do I still like it or not? Right? We change so much every year, and not even just in the growth we do intellectually or physically or anything, but I mean, from the cellular level, we're literally different. And so checking in is so important on that journey. And
For
what
sure.
I'm hearing you say is that, like, path to happiness, one, it's not linear. It's not like this, upward track. And two, it shifts, it kind of evolves and meanders, and you go down on these like side quests, and you discover new things about yourself and go, hey, maybe that's something to add, or maybe this is now something to subtract. And it's constantly like fine tuning.
Exactly. And that's, when I look back at my life, it has been a lot of, yeah, sure, the ups and downs, but also the side paths and things,
Yeah.
because I'm grateful that I actually did take a moment to really think about things and how unhappy I was at different times in my life, and that's what led to a lot of changes.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I mentioned that, like, worked crazy hard until I finished my PhD, mostly motivated by finance, but it was also, I just wanted to have the PhD so then I could decide what to do next as soon as
Right.
possible. But then suddenly, when I was faced with like opportunities after the PhD, there was the path that I always thought I was going to go down, which was academia, and so the next step would be a postdoc, and then you eventually become a professor and things like that. But after having been in that field for a few years, I just realized I wouldn't be happy. The way it's set up, it's not really set up in many countries around the world for it to be a decent experience for scientists, because you're constantly
Mm-hmm.
chasing money. Many scientists end up even not being super ethical with their work because they're just so desperate to publish something or to get another grant,
Right.
and there's all sorts of interpersonal drama and whatever, and I just realized I can't do this, not for my own mental health sake, but also I felt like I wouldn't achieve my goals in life if I went down that career. So I pivoted to something completely different, unexpected at the time, which was a big risk for me, but ended up actually working out pretty well for me. And so these sorts of things happened a few times in my life, and I'm really grateful that I took that moment to be like, no, this is really not good for me. And so, for example, most recently, I switched from doing all these simulated missions to the moon and Mars to starting my own project, the Astro 7 Summits project. And I started that also by founding a nonprofit in my home country in Slovakia and Extreme Frontiers here in the US. And I knew that that was the best thing for me. But
Yeah.
then I faced a lot of, I wouldn't say backlash, but there were definitely a few people in my life that were like, but no, this is, you're known for being an analog astronaut and you're known for this, you're known for that. How can you pivot to something so different? Isn't that a huge how
Mm,
making such a change would affect my career and future and all these things. But fortunately, I listened to my gut and to my heart, and I was just really unhappy in the situation I was in at the time. Both, A, I had been doing it for a while, needed a change, but also my working conditions were not very fair.
yeah.
It was my salary and things like that. So I was just like, let me just take a risk again, create something of my own. It's something I'm very passionate about. And, we'll see how it goes. Worst case, it fails and I switch to something else again. And so
Yeah.
it's almost unlike me to take such a big risk, but I just felt in my heart that was the right thing to do. And now when I look back, 4 years ago when I was making these decisions, and I was so scared, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness I did that. Thank goodness I didn't let people dissuade me from following this. And so sometimes you really just have to trust your gut and your heart and just do what you feel is best for you, even though it might be, yeah, something completely different, might seem like a big risk, but know that,
Yeah.
ultimately it's hopefully just another lesson learned if it doesn't work out.
I love that. I love that you said that the worst thing that could possibly happen is that you fail, and so what? It's like, yeah, so what? I mean, we have such a hang up about this thing, and it's just learning, right? I mean, if you think about it like a science experiment, right? You're just learning what works and what doesn't work.
Exactly.
And I heard it reframed once. I heard made it as like an acronym: first attempt in learning.
Okay,
And
yeah, I
it's
like
like
that.
you get new data, right? And then you get to go like, okay, well, that didn't go as expected. Let's try again. And if we can treat it that way, our whole experience can be dramatically different. It's that equanimity. And instead of trying to force reality to be in this like pretty little box that we, for whatever reason, created, it's just like, oh, okay, it's like that. Great. Now what would I like to do? And just being able to be agile, I think is such an important skill set, particularly as we're trying to navigate our own experience of happiness, and understanding that happiness is one facet, one expression of the human experience. And there's so many others within, there's joy, and then there's like even being melancholy or nostalgic, or, all of those experiences are so valuable because they inform us about the things we need to decide on for our own boundaries, our own experience, how we create safety, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I had a coach once ask me this question, and it really stuck with me. So I'll ask you. So,
Hmm.
Michaela, do you like to laugh?
Oh, yes, I love to laugh.
Yeah, you love to laugh, right? It's fun. It feels good. It releases endorphins. Okay, great. Do you want to laugh 24/7?
No. I mean,
Right?
not that, it's a bad thing. I think I would just be in pain if I was like
Right?
laughing
Yeah.
24 hours.
We might
Just
have really
need
good
need
abs.
to.
Right? We might be super strong in our abdominal muscles, but our
Yeah,
face might hurt.
yeah.
People might think we're crazy, like the Joker, and so that's the thing, right? Is we shouldn't ever be clinging to any one state for the end all be all. There's going to be moments of like peace or just calm, serenity. We're going to be tired sometimes. Like we have to sleep. It's just part of our biology. And so removing ourselves from like a singularity of like this is the end all be all, I think really helps us to be more agile. Um, have you come across the emotions wheel?
Rings a bell, but I'm not too familiar with that.
Okay, so I love the emotions wheel because in positive psychology they talk a lot about um, emotions and empathy and understanding the experience, right? And language is what informs our experience. So when we don't know what's happening, right? Think about little kids, they don't understand, they might be scared, or they might get angry, or they might, just be shocked or surprised. But as they learn, as we learn, we can then navigate the experience better, right? We understand it's not the end of the world, or, whatever we might be thinking. And so as we expand, there's like six core emotions, and then there's a second ring and then a third ring. And as we expand outward, we get more granularity. So, like shocked is under surprised, and it can also be under anger,
Hmm.
right? And so we can start to understand the experience that we're having better when we can name it. We're not scared of it, so we don't try to suppress it or run away from it or pretend it's not happening. And it's a powerful tool to use, particularly with people like I did not grow up in a very high EQ household because it was very achievement focused. You know, it was again, it was like emotions aren't necessary. Let's focus on the science and the math and the grades and this kind of thing. And then in aviation and aerospace, similar conversation. But then when you start to be able to understand that, have language, it changed everything. And now there's an app. I believe it's Yale Center of Happiness, and so they've created an app called How We Feel.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to howwefeel.org, then you can download on your phone. You can there's four quadrants. There's pleasant and on this side and unpleasant on the other side, and then low energy and high energy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say, okay, well, I feel pretty pleasant right now, but I'm more mellow, so I'll go down here. There's all these different words with a shape, and then you get to navigate and read, like, what does this word mean? Oh, I'm not feeling that way. Maybe I'll choose this one. And then over time, this is my favorite part, and which I think you'll like too, is you get data, you get graphs, you get to see like how many times you experience an emotion over the course of a month or 6 months. And it really reframed things for me because last year there was a month where everything was awful. I thought it was awful. I was crying in the closet, kind of awful at one point, right? So I was feeling like it was a terrible time and nothing was going right. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the month, I got my little report and it was like, hey, you only had 12% unpleasant emotions this month. And I was like, what, 12%? And I look at it and like 10% of those 12% were tired,
Uh-huh.
and not even like the extreme extremes, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So it made me reframe what my experience was. And most of those are at the end of the day or like the end of the week, right? With typical cycles of where we don't have energy. And it's been fascinating. So it was designed by psychologists, engineers, and data scientists. And it's reframing the emotional experiences. Like you're just an emotion scientist. You're just figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and how to navigate and better prep yourself and all of that. And it's been such a powerful tool. So I always like to mention it to people who work in spaces where empathy is, a requirement, and they work with people who maybe struggle to name their experience. So that might be something that
Oh, that's
I would
really
love to. I would be
interesting.
so curious in an intense environment like on analog, if people were self-tracking that, how that might help them through some
Mm-hmm.
of the more sticky points of that
Yeah, it would definitely,
experience.
add much more perspective, like in the example that you gave, where overall you think, oh, it was a terrible month or whatever, or a terrible
Yeah.
experience, but the reality is very different, at least based on your own assessment. I think for me, I do things a little bit differently, where a long time ago, I just taught myself to try and let go of the negatives.
Mm.
So I just file it away somewhere in the back of my head, hope that I won't need it again, sort of thing. And I just really try and focus on the positives. And it doesn't always work, and I don't want to
Yeah.
live in this false state, everything is positive, but just so that when I think back to what happened over the last, say, week or whatever, I just, the highlights stick out are the good things, and I just try not to dwell on the bad things. And if anything, if something bad does happen, I try and just get some lesson out of it. What did I learn? What can I do better next time, or how to avoid this situation, or whatever. But really just try and move, past it, move forward. And that's something that has helped me a lot. And even now, in my own kind of search for happiness in recent years, I just, acknowledge that there's going to be those low emotions and tough times, and it's important that we learn how to get through them, but then always have those positive things to really hold on to or to look forward to. And so I do these little things. As an example, every week I try and give myself at least a couple of kind of me times, when I will go for a walk and get myself a favorite drink that I have, and read my book, or talk to a friend, or just these little things. And I make sure I do that at least a couple of times a week, and it's something I genuinely look forward to, just having this very simple, easy me time. And then, of course, I also try to have time with friends and do some fun
Yeah.
activities. But if anything, the thing that brings me the biggest joy is the me time, because it's when my body and mind get to do what they just desire to do, which many times is just to sit at peace and read a book and drink my
Hmm.
favorite drink or go for a walk. And sometimes that's not enough, and that's when I go out with friends and do something more fun. But
Yeah.
to just like on purpose designate time for those
Mm.
things for me has been an incredible help in making me feel better, and always having those happy memories to hold on to or to look forward to.
Yes, I love that. And yeah, the scheduling it is important. Some people think that it's like, why would I schedule it? I'll remember to do it. But the reality is we don't. We're not very good at it. We, especially for those of us who like, like to give to others, or maybe are a recovering people pleaser, right? You give away the free time to other people, and then you realize like, hey, I didn't read my book, or I didn't take the bath, or I didn't have my cup of tea. And so scheduling it and having that to look forward to, I think, is so powerful because that's it's like you're basically giving yourself dopamine to work towards that thing, and you're more motivated because you're like, hey, when I get this done, I get to go read my book, or I get to sit and stare out the window and have my cup of tea and listen to the birds, and wind down for the evening. And those little moments are really what make everything, right? And it's what keeps us going to be able to not burn out. Because I feel the narrative that's overused so many times is if you love it, you'll never work a day in your life. And it's like,
Mm.
I love what I do, but it's definitely still tiring and
Yeah.
work. So if I'm not having those moments, like you mentioned, maybe I can run 300 miles an hour for 3 weeks and then I'm going to fall off a cliff and not be able to do anything, right?
Yeah, it's yeah, very true, and it's something I learned the hard way too, where I also you know face near burnout or various other medical issues, because that's the thing. Like many people don't realize that when we're overwhelmed mentally, it will have an effect on the body. The body will
Oh,
start
absolutely.
saying, "Stop, you can't do this anymore." Whether it's the full burnout or it will be just things shutting down or not working
Mhm.
properly. In my case, it was my wrists. I ended up getting carpal tunnel on both my
Oh
wrists
my
at one
goodness.
point, and I couldn't do anything. And so
Yeah.
it really stopped me, and it was a good time for me to self reflect and think of how to do things better in the future. And yeah, like you said, scheduling things has helped me a lot. In the past, I was kind of a bit skeptical, but
Mhm.
scheduling, that's kind of part of like assigning it almost like a work,
Right.
designated
It's a
time,
commitment that you're
like
making.
a commitment, yeah, like something I would put into my work planner. But with time, I realized no, it's just something that kind of helped me stick to it and
Yeah.
made sure that it happened those 2 3 times a week, and that most importantly, I didn't schedule work instead of those
Yes.
times for other things.
Yes.
And nowadays, I literally work around those times. If I, for example, if I want to do this on a Thursday afternoon, I will make sure I will not have any work calls or other commitments on a Thursday afternoon, so that I can do this thing or another. For example, as a hobby that I took on recently, is I finally gotten into singing. It's something I've been wanting to
Oh,
do for
wonderful.
years and years and years, and I finally, I have my Tuesday evenings. I'm part of like a somewhat of a rock band, if you will.
Cool.
And every Tuesday evening I do that, and it brings me a lot of happiness. And
Yeah.
I will schedule everything possible around that if I can make it happen.
I love that. I started singing a couple of years ago, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's so fun. It's very cathartic,
it is. It is.
and it's using your voice in a different way. Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing that. What was it that inspired you to start singing? Why singing? Was there something that sparked that for you, or was it something you did before?
I think I've always wanted to sing. I just didn't have the time or the means. So I
Hmm.
think the very first time that I remember that I sang and I got good feedback for it was I was like a little girl, maybe even around maybe the time I discovered volcanoes. I was like 7 or something, and I think it was around the time when Titanic came out, or
Okay.
plus minus, and my mom bought the soundtrack, and I was listening to it, and I was singing along to Celine Dion, and as a 7-year old you don't think that you could keep up with Celine Dion, but I
Right.
apparently didn't sound bad because I would get compliments from people that would come visit us at home. And so it kind of gave me a little self-confidence. Oh, maybe my singing isn't so bad. And so then I think later that year I went to a scout camp in the summer, and then I think I was just singing some Disney songs while doing some chores, and then all the other kids came to listen and wanted me to keep singing, and so it kind of encouraged me, going, oh, okay, if people want to hear me sing, it must be a good sign.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, my parents didn't sign me up to singing classes. I imagine, again, finances were probably the main issue there. And so I just kind of never pursued that until I was at university. And I think it was during my PhD actually that I just randomly came across a group doing a cappella.
Okay.
And I just decided, oh, well, I have some time. Maybe let's give it a try. And I really enjoyed it. And we had several performances. We were in part of a choir for like
Oh,
a
cool.
university designed musical. And so it was a really great experience.
Yeah.
But then unfortunately, PhD took over my life and I couldn't really do that anymore. And so it was just one of those things that I just always wanted to do, but couldn't for whatever reason. So now in recent years, and I was like, okay, I'm really going to dedicate time to pursuing these hobbies that I put on the back burner for too long.
Hmm.
And so as of, yeah, last summer, I just started to make it happen, finally.
Awesome. And I love that language. You decided to make it happen. You were intentional about creating that time for yourself.
Yep.
Beautiful. Amazing. Oh, well, you know what? You're inspiring me to pick back. I've been thinking about doing singing lessons again this
Right.
year.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so that's probably the little synchronicity universe winking at me saying, yes, it's the right time to pick that
Now,
back up.
next conference, we can, do some
Yeah.
singing lessons.
Yes, and I started playing the ukulele at the end of last year,
Oh, cool.
and it was super fun. And then, just life happened, and I started focusing on other things. And then I signed up for a Tough Mudder, so I was focused on that training and didn't really play. And then I started dating someone new, and it's like hanging on my wall. And he's like, "Will you play the ukulele for me?" And I was like, um, let's see what I can remember, right? And so but I picked it up and I remembered some chords and I was able to do it. And it was really delightful. Like it was just
Oh,
a
wonderful.
joy to be like, hey, I put in those reps. I had the practice. I can't play a song by any means like I could maybe 4 months ago when I was doing it every day, but like it's still there, right? So yeah, it's those little things that really do require intention and discipline, but I think my next step is to schedule that in. I did ask ChatGPT to help me with a training plan, so now I just got to schedule it into my calendar so that I do it.
Nice, nice.
Amazing. Well, Michaela, this has been so great. I've really enjoyed learning a lot more about you. I always like to finish the podcast with three questions, so we'll transition over to that now,
Mhm.
pivot, if you will. So my first question that I always like to ask is, what is your superpower?
Well, not sure if I have one, but if I had to choose something that I think is probably my biggest strength would be what we talked about earlier, empathy and compassion, probably the combination of the two.
Mm,
For others, it's what motivates me to keep going in difficult times. I always try and see the good in other people and have understanding for them. So it's those things I think that have helped me a lot in life, even though I did suppress it to some degree for a few years.
beautiful. I love that. Okay, next question. The question is, who's on your personal board of directors? Now, this doesn't have to be people that you actually know. It could be people whose philosophy you really believe in, and so you look at it through like a lens of, like, hey, what would Oprah do, or what would this person do? It doesn't have to be a person of today. It could be from the past, a historical figure. It could even be an avatar or a fictional character. Who are those people that you resonate with, that you go to when you might need some extra perspective when you're making a decision?
Well, I have actually a pretty good and real board of directors, and those are my closest friends.
Yeah.
They joke that I set it up very conveniently because they're literally all over the globe. So they joke that if I need anyone at any time of the day, there's always someone awake somewhere who will pick
That
up
is
the
very
phone.
strategic.
Of
It
course, I didn't do that on purpose. Just life happens.
happened that
But
way.
yeah, they're people that I've been close with for a very long time, a couple of decades, some of them. So they're the people I always go to if I have any doubts making these big changing decisions and all that. They are very wise and experienced, but most importantly, they're just people I can trust and who know me really well. And
Beautiful.
then, sure, there are other people that I maybe look up to. For example, I really admire anyone who does work kind of self-sacrificing to some degree to help
Mhm.
others, whether it's activists, doctors, and others who are really able to put aside maybe their own needs to help others in some shape or form. I really admire those people, and they're kind of heroes to me, and examples that I follow when I'm kind of planning my activities.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah, it's and I'm sure the situation calls for different people, right? Different
Yeah,
perspectives.
yep, for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Now, this question maybe you've already contemplated just because of the work you do, but if there was to be another life form, another intelligent species that came to Earth, and the first human they interact with is you, Michaela, what do they learn about humanity because they've met you?
Oh wow. Well, hopefully not too many bad things.
Hmm.
I would try to show them the good things, and so since for me, empathy and compassion are so important, I would definitely like to um, show them that's something that brings a lot of humans together and helps us work towards common goals. And those of us who really apply empathy and compassion are able to really make a difference in this world for the better. And so I guess I would like to have them see mostly this good side of humanity and not so
Mm,
much some of the bad things that are also happening in this world. But even in the dark or not so happy times, I think of all the amazing people I encountered around the world,
mm,
and no matter where I was, no matter how poor the people were or how difficult their situation was, there's so many that were just still looking out for one another, helping strangers,
yeah.
and just being really, really good people. So that's definitely what I would like to show the aliens if I ever meet them.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I've had such a great time with you this afternoon. Michaela, where can people follow more about your work and learn more about the things that you're up to?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I have different socials. So, for example, on Instagram, Threads, and what is it? TikTok, I'm under Astro underscore Michaela. On
Okay.
Facebook, I am Dr. Michaela Musilova. I have a page. LinkedIn as well. I think it's Michaela Musilova PhD. And I have a website, which is michaelamusilova.com, where you can find all the information in one place, including if you are interested in joining any of my projects, being part of them, or donating towards them to help make them happen. Would appreciate, of course, all help, but even if you just want to follow along, I'd be happy to share some of my experiences with you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. We'll make sure that's included in all of the show notes that people can easily access all of your socials. I'm impressed that you have the TikTok and Threads. That's definitely something. I don't have the Tic Tac, as I've heard some some politicians say, but we'll definitely make sure to have people follow along, and we'll put the links for your projects as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes, you're so welcome. And for everyone who tuned in us with us live today, thank you for being here. For those of you listening after the fact, we love that you're here with us in the lounge, getting new perspectives and shifting your beliefs one episode at a time. If this was an episode that you really liked, please remember to like and subscribe and share with your network. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks.
Okay, perfect. It might, yeah. Oh, we're almost done with the upload. Yours is
Okay.
done.